A bizarre mystery begins with a desperate search. A night shattered by the sudden disappearance of a young woman. Detectives arrive to find evidence of violence, hinting at a difficult and harrowing case. The crime scene is eerie, walls smeared with blood and signs of a brutal struggle. The criminal taunts the authorities, torments families, and revels in the chaos he creates. As the case unfolds, investigators face chilling murders unlike anything they have encountered before. This is not just a story of murder, but one of horror, deception, and merciless evil. A vibrant American high school senior, she embarked on a celebratory journey with her classmates, destined to create cherished memories of sunsets, laughter, and the rhythm of island life. Instead, her disappearance became one of the most haunting cases of our time, turning her into a symbol of unanswered questions and grief. As the warm Aruban nights blanketed the island, a sinister undercurrent seemed to weave through its picturesque beauty. Among the festive tourists, one figure stood out, not for his fame, but for his charm and an enigmatic aura. Natalie Holloway was born on October 24, 1986 in Clinton, Mississippi. She was the eldest child in her family, a bright and ambitious young woman who stood out in academics and extracurricular activities. Her parents divorced when she was 7, but they maintained a close-knit family dynamic, with Natalie and her younger brother primarily living with their mother. When Natalie was 14, her mother remarried a wealthy businessman, and the family moved to Mountain Brook, Alabama, where Natalie thrived in her new environment. Excelling in school, she became a cheerleader and dancer, earning a full scholarship to the University of Alabama. Her future seemed boundless, full of promise and potential. In May 2005, Natalie joined 124 fellow high school students and 11 chaperones on a celebratory trip to Aruba, marking their graduation. Aruba, a picturesque island in the Dutch Caribbean, was renowned for its safety and low crime rate, making it an ideal destination. The group stayed at an all-inclusive Holiday Inn, where they enjoyed days of sun-soaked beaches, crystal-clear waters, and carefree relaxation. Nights were spent dining, socializing, and exploring the local nightlife, including casinos and bars. For Natalie and her friends, the trip felt like a dream come true, a perfect send-off before beginning their next chapter in life. On May 29th, the final day of their trip, students began packing their belongings for the flight home. Natalie, like her peers, placed her passport beside her suitcase, preparing for an early departure the next morning. After dinner, some students opted to spend their last night unwinding, while others ventured out to soak up the vibrant Aruban nightlife one final time. Natalie chose the latter, heading out with friends to enjoy the festive atmosphere. It was the last time anyone from her group would see her. The next morning, teachers and students gathered in the hotel lobby for checkout. However, during roll call, they discovered that Natalie was missing. Assuming she had overslept, chaperones called her room, but there was no answer. Concerned, they enlisted hotel staff to unlock her door, only to find an untouched suitcase with her passport inside. Clear signs she had not returned the previous night. Panic set in as staff, teachers, and students scoured the hotel grounds, but Natalie was nowhere to be found. By 11 a.m., a chaperone contacted Natalie's mother, Beth Holloway, informing her of the situation. Beth, devastated by the news, insisted that Natalie would never leave on her own and expressed her immediate fear that her daughter had been abducted. Her maternal instinct was spot on. Something was terribly wrong. Beth called Natalie's biological father, Dave Holloway, and together, they vowed to do everything possible to find their daughter. Meanwhile, the chaperones reported Natalie's disappearance to local police, initiating a search. With heavy hearts, most of the students and teachers returned home, leaving behind a smaller group of volunteers to aid the investigation. Aruban authorities quickly launched an official inquiry, focusing on retracing Natalie's steps on the night she vanished. Witness accounts pointed to Joran van der Sloot, then an 18-year-old Dutch student, as the last person seen with her. Joran, who had been living in Aruba and frequenting the same bars as the students, reportedly left with Natalie and 2 friends in a car. Initially, Joran and his associates claimed they had dropped Natalie off at her hotel after a night of drinking, but their stories soon unraveled under scrutiny. The Holloway family flew to Aruba to assist in the search, sparing no expense in hiring private investigators and coordinating with the police. Beth Holloway's presence on the island became a symbol of unwavering determination as she tirelessly pursued leads, distributed flyers, and rallied media attention. Despite these efforts, physical evidence was scarce, and the investigation faced numerous setbacks, including inconsistent testimonies, delays, and allegations of corruption within the Aruban justice system. The mystery of Natalie's disappearance grew darker with each passing day. Joran's behavior raised further suspicion. He gave multiple contradictory accounts of the events, sometimes claiming innocence and at other times implicating himself in bizarre ways. In one recorded conversation, he admitted to being involved in Natalie's death, only to later retract his statement, calling it a fabrication. These false confessions only deepened the Holloway family's anguish and fueled public outrage. Aruba faced mounting pressure from the United States, as the disappearance of an American teenager on its shores threatened to damage its tourism-driven economy. Yet despite exhaustive searches, including dives to explore underwater caves and shipwrecks, Natalie's body was never found, and no definitive evidence linked Joran to her presumed death. With every revelation, the case grew darker. Allegations of false confessions, tampered evidence, and judicial missteps left the Holloway family in agony, grasping at hope in a sea of despair. Joran's actions, marked by evasions and shocking admissions, only deepened the suspicions. The intense media scrutiny surrounding Natalie's disappearance highlighted a disturbing underbelly of tourism-dependent Aruba, where local authorities were pressured to maintain an image of safety for their American visitors. This pressure became palpable as Natalie's parents, Beth and Dave Holloway, relentlessly sought answers. Joran, never shy of the limelight, added fuel to the fire. He appeared in interviews with a brazen demeanor, recounting his version of the events leading up to Natalie's disappearance. Claiming innocence, he painted himself as a victim of public hysteria while shamelessly capitalizing on the publicity to profit from books and interviews. Despite their efforts, Aruban police struggled to gather concrete evidence against Joran. Searches of his home yielded no definitive clues, further frustrating the Holloway family and their supporters. Joran's polarizing persona captivated audiences across the globe. Some saw him as a pathological liar whose behavior betrayed his guilt, while others believed his protestations of innocence. The tragedy took an even more chilling turn years later when Joran, already under suspicion for Natalie's case, became involved in the brutal murder of Stephanie Flores in Peru. Once again, the world was confronted with questions about his psyche and the motivations behind such acts of cruelty. Was he a remorseless predator, or was there a more complex story buried beneath his contradictions? To truly understand this case, it's crucial to examine the parallel tragedy of Stephanie Flores. A bright, ambitious young woman from a prominent Peruvian family, Stephanie was adored by her parents and 4 older brothers. Her father, Ricardo Flores, was a respected businessman and former presidential candidate. Stephanie's love for gambling brought her into fateful contact with Joran in 2010. On May 30, 2010, 21-year-old Stephanie Flores went to a poker tournament at the Atlantic City Casino in Lima, Peru. Stephanie was an avid poker player, well known for her skills at the table, and just days before, she had won $10,000, a testament to her strategic mind and confidence in her abilities. As she prepared for the event, she assured her father, Ricardo Flores, that she would only be away for a short time. Her family had no reason to worry. Stephanie was a responsible young woman who maintained close communication with her loved ones. However, after the tournament, she never returned home. Ricardo Flores became increasingly concerned when he could not reach his daughter. Stephanie had never disappeared before, and her sudden silence was completely out of character. He called her brothers for help, and together, they reached out to Stephanie's friends and acquaintances, but no one had seen or heard from her. Desperation set in as they scoured the neighborhood and frequented her usual haunts, but their efforts yielded nothing. Finally, with a heavy heart, Ricardo contacted the police to report her disappearance. The investigation began at the Atlantic City Casino, where the poker tournament had taken place. Police spoke to staff members, but no one had any information about Stephanie's whereabouts. Detectives obtained surveillance footage from the hotel, hoping the cameras could provide clues. Upon reviewing the recordings, they found footage of Stephanie entering the tournament area around 3 a.m. She sat beside a man dressed in light-colored clothing who was already at the table. The two appeared to strike up a friendly conversation, sharing smiles and chatting throughout the event. Around 5 a.m., they left together. Hotel employees remembered the man, describing him as polite and charming, with one staff member even likening his looks to actor Brad Pitt. However, charm was not enough to dispel the growing suspicions surrounding the mystery man. Where had the pair gone after leaving the casino floor? Further surveillance footage provided the answer. At 5:16 a.m., the two entered room 309, a room registered in the man's name. Shortly after, he was seen leaving the room and returning with coffee and pastries. 3 hours and 20 minutes later, he exited again, this time carrying a backpack, and never returned. Before leaving the hotel, the man informed the staff not to disturb the occupant of room 309, claiming she was resting. Respecting his request, no one entered the room until the police arrived to investigate. When detectives opened the door, they were met with a horrifying sight. Stephanie Flores lay dead, covered in blood, and the room was in disarray. The brutality of the crime shocked even the seasoned investigators. Stephanie's body showed signs of a violent struggle. Her neck was broken, and there was evidence of blunt force trauma to her head and neck. Blood stained the floor and walls, and the medical examiner later confirmed that she had died from a cerebral hemorrhage caused by the blunt trauma. Despite the violence of the scene, there was no evidence of sexual assault, leading investigators to rule out that motive. However, the motive of robbery quickly emerged. Stephanie's money, credit cards, and jewelry were missing. She had been carrying around $155,000, including $10,000 only in poker winnings and $5,000 from her father for a new laptop. The suspect had not only taken her life, but also her possessions, fleeing the scene in cold calculation. The man identified by the surveillance footage and the room's registration was 22-year-old Joran van der Sloot, a Dutch national. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered startling information about him. He was already on an international wanted list. Joran's name had been infamously linked to the disappearance of another young woman, Natalie Holloway, which we talked about earlier. The parallels between the two cases were chilling. In both instances, Joran had been the last person seen with the victims. Both young women had promising futures, and their lives were cut tragically short. The connection between Natalie and Stephanie's cases reignited global scrutiny of Joran van der Sloot, exposing him as a manipulative figure who used charm to gain trust before unleashing violence. Joran's actions revealed a dangerous pattern, prompting questions about how he had evaded justice for so long. In the aftermath of Stephanie's murder, international outrage mounted. Her family, much like Natalie Holloway's, embarked on a painful journey for justice, facing not only their personal grief, but also the systemic failures that allowed Joran to remain free for years. As authorities pursued him, the Flores family stood resolute, determined to honor Stephanie's memory by ensuring her killer was held accountable. Their fight for justice became emblematic of the broader struggle to protect vulnerable individuals and hold perpetrators of violence to account. The investigation into Stephanie's murder exposed Joran's true nature, a man capable of calculating brutality, deceit, and exploitation. His crimes served as a grim reminder of the dangers that can lurk beneath a polished exterior. This information was deeply troubling. It suggested that the suspect, Joran van der Sloot, might be linked to multiple crimes. For the authorities, apprehending this dangerous individual became a top priority. The manhunt was relentless, but Joran's exact whereabouts were unknown, leaving the police with limited leads. As they scoured for clues, investigators revisited the details of Natalie Holloway's disappearance, a case that had already gripped the world and shed light on Joran's dark potential. Understanding the circumstances surrounding Natalie's fate was essential to piecing together the broader pattern of Joran's behavior. Let's return to the story of Natalie Holloway. The parallels between the two cases painted a harrowing picture of a predator who exploited trust, charm, and opportunity to commit unimaginable crimes. For both families, the quest for justice became an enduring struggle. A painful reminder that even in paradise, darkness can strike without warning. Together, Natalie Holloway's parents, Beth and Dave, took the first available flight from a nearby city to Aruba, determined to find their daughter. Before boarding, Beth made frantic calls to emergency services and the FBI, pleading for their assistance in locating Natalie. Upon arrival on the island, they wasted no time launching their own search efforts. With photos of their missing daughter in hand, they questioned hotel staff, guests, and locals, refusing to leave any stone unturned. Their desperation was palpable, but their resolve was even stronger. Natalie had not returned to her hotel room on the final night of her trip. Friends reported seeing her talking to a tall, European-looking young man at the casino adjacent to their hotel. Security footage confirmed these accounts, showing Natalie interacting with the man, later identified as Joran van der Sloot. Around 1 a.m., Natalie was seen leaving the casino and getting into a gray Honda with Joran and two other young men, brothers Deepak and Satish Kalpo. All three were familiar faces at the hotel, known for frequenting the casino and preying on young, affluent tourists. But of the three suspects, only one stood out. Joran van der Sloot, at just 18, already had a reputation that belied his privileged upbringing. Born to a respected family, his father a lawyer aspiring to become a judge, Joran had been a promising student and athlete. However, his teenage years marked a descent into troubling behavior. He became a regular at local casinos and bars, developed a gambling problem, and was known for drinking excessively. Despite his polished exterior, those who knew him recognized his darker tendencies. When confronted by the Holloways and police, Joran's family initially deflected suspicion. The gray Honda linked to Natalie's disappearance was parked outside their home, yet Joran's father claimed his son was at another hotel casino. By the time authorities arrived there, Joran had left. It wasn't until later that Joran returned home, prompting his father to contact the police. Separated from his friends Deepak and Satish during questioning, Joran's account of the night immediately raised red flags. Initially, he claimed to have no connection to Natalie, but after being shown CCTV footage, his story shifted dramatically. Joran now admitted he had spent time with Natalie that night. He claimed she wanted to visit a nightclub, and he obliged, bringing along Deepak and Satish for the ride. The group partied, danced, and drank before heading to the lighthouse for a scenic view and then to Arashi Beach. Joran alleged that his friends left him and Natalie at the beach, where she, heavily intoxicated, began falling over and blacking out. Joran claimed he eventually left her there, explaining that he needed to wake up early for business the next morning. According to him, Natalie insisted she wanted to stay on the beach, making it clear she wouldn't be leaving with him. Joran's shifting narrative sowed confusion and frustration among investigators. At one point, he insinuated that a hotel security guard had approached Natalie after he left, but surveillance footage contradicted this claim, proving Natalie never returned to the hotel. As the story unraveled, Deepak and Satish also changed their accounts, now asserting that Joran had been more involved with Natalie than he admitted. They alleged he had left her on the beach alone after spending significant time with her. Despite repeated interrogations, arrests, and mounting inconsistencies in their statements, the trio evaded formal charges. Aruban authorities cited insufficient evidence, as no physical proof connected them to Natalie's disappearance. The Holloway family was devastated by the lack of progress, but they refused to give up. Beth became a relentless advocate for her daughter, keeping media attention on the case and pressuring officials to hold Joran and his accomplices accountable. In a cruel twist of fate, Joran's connection to Natalie's disappearance resurfaced years later in another horrific crime. On May 30, 2010, exactly 5 years after Natalie vanished, Joran murdered Stephanie Flores in a hotel room in Lima, Peru. What we talked about earlier in this video, This shocking act underscored his dangerous nature and further cemented the belief that he had been involved in Natalie's presumed death. In 2017, Joran confessed to Natalie's death during an extortion attempt against Beth Holloway, claiming he could lead investigators to her remains. However, this was later revealed as another cruel lie. The difficult case did not give the officers any peace. After some time, the police combed the beach again thoroughly, but their search yielded no significant clues that could lead to finding Natalie Holloway. Investigators grew increasingly frustrated as time passed without progress. However, a potential breakthrough came when a gardener at a nearby hotel claimed to have seen 3 young men, Joran van der Sloot, Deepak, and Satish Kalpoe, digging a hole in a vacant lot near a pond on the night of Natalie's disappearance. Acting on this lead, the police arrived at the location, drained the pond, and excavated the area, but found nothing. The tip, like so many others, led nowhere, leaving the case shrouded in mystery. Natalie's family grew increasingly exasperated with the investigation. They publicly accused the police of incompetence, expressing their belief that Joran van der Sloot was deeply involved in their daughter's disappearance and should be coerced into confessing. However, Aruban authorities refrained from taking aggressive measures without conclusive evidence. Tensions between the family and the local police mounted, further complicating the investigation. Desperate to find their daughter, the Holloways announced a substantial reward: $100,000 for information about Natalie's whereabouts and $1 million for her safe return. While the reward garnered significant attention, it also introduced chaos. The police argued that the reward created distractions, as locals bombarded them with baseless tips, conspiracy theories, and false leads, ultimately hindering their efforts. Despite the mounting tensions, the Holloways refused to give up. They distributed flyers, put up posters, and canvassed the island, leaving no avenue unexplored. Meanwhile, local sentiment began to shift, with some residents accusing the Holloway family of applying undue pressure on the authorities. This friction further strained the already tumultuous relationship between Natalie's family and Aruban officials. After intense scrutiny, Joran van der Sloot, along with the Kalpoe brothers, was taken into custody. For weeks, the suspects faced interrogations, but the evidence remained circumstantial at best. After 3 weeks, Deepak and Satish Kalpoe were released, leaving Joran in custody for 2 more months. At one point, the Kalpoe brothers claimed that Joran's father had helped him dispose of Natalie's body. This accusation led to Paulus van der Sloot's arrest, but authorities could not substantiate the claim, and he was released 3 days later. Paulus sued the Aruban police for wrongful detention and won $40,000 in damages. 3 years after Natalie's disappearance, new testimonies brought renewed attention to the case. A witness claimed to have seen Joran and his father near the pond at 4 a.m. on the night Natalie vanished. According to this account, Joran ran from the pond to a fast food restaurant, and shortly afterward, the pair drove off in a red Jeep. Another lead emerged from Joran's ex-girlfriend, who recounted an unsettling comment he had made. "Who knows? You might be on the beach with someone capable of disposing of a corpse." She reported feeling deeply unnerved by the remark, which only heightened suspicions about his involvement. Despite these new leads and the ever-changing accounts provided by Joran and his associates, the authorities determined there was still insufficient evidence to press charges. The case against Joran, Deepak, and Satish was officially closed, with investigators asserting it would only be reopened if substantial new evidence emerged. Joran van der Sloot's behavior in the aftermath of Natalie's disappearance was as shocking as it was chilling. Rather than maintaining a low profile, he appeared to revel in the attention, granting interviews and making brazen statements. In 2008, a Dutch journalist released hidden camera footage in which Joran described Natalie's final moments. According to the recording, Joran claimed they had been on the beach together and engaged in sexual activity before Natalie suddenly began convulsing and lost consciousness. In a matter-of-fact tone, he detailed how he called a friend with a boat to dispose of her body at sea. While the tape initially appeared damning, Aruban authorities dismissed it as insufficient evidence. They argued that Joran's statements were unreliable, speculating that he was seeking fame and financial gain by sensationalizing his involvement. Forensic experts pointed out that without a body or corroborating evidence, the claims in the tape were legally inconclusive. Another recording emerged in which Joran seemed to mock the situation, expressing relief that Natalie's body hadn't been found, as it would have incriminated him. Joran's erratic behavior continued to escalate. He voluntarily checked himself into a psychiatric clinic, further complicating public perception of his mental state and motives. Critics speculated that he was attempting to manipulate public opinion or build a defense strategy based on mental health issues. Throughout these developments, the Holloway family never wavered in their determination to find answers. Beth Holloway became a tireless advocate for missing persons, using Natalie's case as a platform to raise awareness about the challenges families face when a loved one vanishes. Her persistence kept the case in the public eye, ensuring that the world would not forget Natalie's story. Meanwhile, the lack of closure continued to haunt the Holloways. The strain took an emotional and financial toll on the family, but they refused to let the passage of time erode their hope. Beth Holloway frequently returned to Aruba, revisiting potential leads and working with private investigators in a relentless quest for justice. While Joran van der Sloot's actions have been widely condemned, the failure to secure justice for Natalie underscores broader systemic challenges in international investigations. After leaving Aruba, Joran van der Sloot moved to Bangkok, Thailand, where he used money earned from media interviews and the sale of books to open a restaurant. For a time, he seemed to settle into his new life, but trouble quickly followed him. In the same year, a journalist interviewed him in Thailand, and during the conversation, Joran claimed he had sold Natalie Holloway into sexual slavery for money. He alleged that he had split the profits with the Kalpo brothers, who had helped him. Shockingly, he also bragged about trafficking Thai women to the Netherlands, reportedly earning $30,000 for each woman. However, after the interview, he called the journalist back and claimed it was all a joke. Joran's erratic behavior raised alarms, and local authorities launched an investigation into his statements about trafficking Thai women. Although no conclusive evidence was found, the scrutiny forced Joran to flee Thailand, abandoning his business and savings. Later, he managed to sell the restaurant remotely, cutting his ties to the country. Not long after these events, Joran faced a personal tragedy when his father, Paulus van der Sloot, died of a heart attack. Joran reportedly blamed himself for his father's death, believing the stress from the accusations and legal battles contributed to it. Overwhelmed with guilt, he suffered a nervous breakdown and was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. However, his time there did little to change his behavior or character. Upon his release, Joran found himself in dire financial straits and devised another scheme to make money. In 2019, Natalie Holloway's family lawyer revealed that Joran had contacted him anonymously, offering to sell information about the location of Natalie's remains. He demanded $250,000 for the information, with an upfront payment of $25,000. Despite his anonymity, investigators traced the communications back to Joran. Desperate for answers, Natalie's father agreed to meet Joran on the island of Aruba and paid him an advance of $25,000. During the meeting, Joran spun a new tale about Natalie's fate. He claimed that after picking her up, she wanted to be let go. According to him, during a heated argument, he pushed her, causing her to fall and hit her head on a rock, resulting in her instant death. Panicked, he said he sought his father's help, and together, they buried her body in the foundation of a house under construction. However, when police investigated the location Joran indicated, they discovered his story was another fabrication. The house had already been completed before Natalie's disappearance. Afterward, Joran emailed Natalie's father, admitting he had lied and fabricated the story. The Holloways, working with the FBI, used this fraudulent scheme to build a case against him. Joran was eventually charged with extortion, but before he could be apprehended, he fled Aruba. He traveled to Chile in 2 separate taxis, hoping to evade capture and board a flight out of the region. However, his escape was short-lived. On June 3, 2010, Joran's ex-girlfriend contacted the police, providing a tip about his whereabouts after he had called her to ask for money to fund his escape. Acting on her information, Chilean police apprehended Joran as he attempted to buy a plane ticket. In Chile, he was charged with the murder of Stephanie, which he committed in Peru. During his initial interrogation, Joran denied responsibility for Stephanie's death. He concocted a story about armed robbers breaking into the hotel room, stealing valuables, and killing Stephanie in the process. According to him, he had managed to escape during the chaos, and the blood on his clothes was from Stephanie's injuries. However, the evidence quickly dismantled his lies. Hotel CCTV footage showed no robbers entering the room, no gunshots were heard, and, most damningly, Stephanie had not been shot but beaten to death. Faced with the overwhelming evidence, Joran confessed 4 days after his arrest. He admitted that he and Stephanie had been talking and along when she accessed his laptop. There, she found information about his alleged involvement in Natalie Holloway's disappearance. He claimed it was a misunderstanding, insisting he had no involvement in the case. But Stephanie, terrified and distrustful, attempted to escape the room. In her panic, she punched Joran in the face, which enraged him. His reaction was violent and brutal. He elbowed her in the nose, leaving her bleeding, and then began choking her. The situation escalated quickly. Blood was everywhere, including on his shirt. In an effort to silence her, Joran placed his shirt over her face and mouth. He only stopped when she ceased showing signs of life. Joran later described the murder as impulsive, blaming alcohol and Stephanie's actions for his loss of control. He claimed he had acted out of fear that she would report him to the police, but investigators suspected a simpler motive: robbery. Money and valuables were missing from the crime scene, and it was believed Joran intended to steal from Stephanie before the situation turned violent. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence in Peru, Joran attempted to negotiate with the authorities. He offered to reveal the location of Natalie Holloway's remains in exchange for being cleared of all charges in Stephanie's case, but the prosecutors refused to entertain his offer. The trial moved forward swiftly. The evidence against him was damning. Surveillance footage showed Joran entering and leaving the hotel room with Stephanie. Her blood was found on his body and clothing, and his DNA matched traces found on the victim and the crime weapon. Realizing he had no defense, Joran pleaded guilty on the advice of his attorney, who assured him this would result in a reduced sentence of 15 years. Joran's manipulative tendencies persisted throughout his incarceration. Despite never being charged in connection with Natalie Holloway's disappearance, he continued to be a figure of suspicion and intrigue. Waiting sentence in Peru, Joran's life took unexpected turns. He began a relationship with Lady Figueroa, a 33-year-old accountant who visited the prison to sell candy and cigarettes. Their romance led to marriage, which initially seemed to provide Joran with stability. However, this stability was short-lived. By 2020, Joran had left Lady for a younger woman, Eva, with whom he became involved in smuggling illegal substances into the prison. When authorities uncovered the operation, Joran was sentenced to additional prison time for drug trafficking. Initially, Peruvian authorities had planned to extradite Joran to the United States only after he completed his sentence for Stephanie Flores' murder. However, in May 2023, the Peruvian government reversed this decision, agreeing to temporarily transfer him to the U.S. to face charges of extortion and wire fraud connected to Natalie's case. The decision was influenced by concerns that critical witnesses in the U.S., many of whom were elderly, might not survive the lengthy delay required for Joran's Peruvian sentence to conclude. The extradition was seen as a breakthrough for the Holloway family, who had spent nearly 2 decades seeking justice for Natalie. While Joran was not being tried for murder in the U.S., the charges against him represented a critical opportunity to hold him accountable for at least some of his actions. Peru's ambassador to the U.S. expressed hope that the extradition would provide closure not only to the Holloway family, but also to Stephanie Flores' grieving loved ones. Joran opposed the extradition and, through his attorney, attempted to overturn it, arguing that he had not been properly notified. His motion was denied. In late May, Joran was severely beaten in a Peruvian prison. Despite his injuries, in early June, FBI agents arrived in Peru and used a plane to extradite him to the US. On June 8, 2023, Joran van der Sloot landed in the United States and was taken to a prison in Birmingham, Alabama, near Natalie Holloway's hometown. Joran was dissatisfied with the sentence and began to blame everything on his lawyer and the police, who allegedly forced him to confess. In the end, Joran was found guilty and sentenced to 28 years in prison. He must also pay compensation to the family of the deceased, Stephanie, in the amount of $775,000. The night air was thick, enveloping the empty parking lot in an unsettling stillness. A black car sat in the shadows, its windows fogged up and the trunk slightly ajar. The police approached the vehicle cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The scene before them was chilling. The victim's face, though barely recognizable, was frozen in an expression of agony. Limbs lay unnaturally contorted, as though they had been cruelly rearranged. Broken nails and bruised knuckles spoke of a violent struggle. The body had been mutilated so severely that identification was already a daunting challenge. Multiple blows, deep bruises, jagged cuts, and dried blood painted a horrifying picture. The stench of death, mingled with a sharp, acrid chemical odor, hung heavy in the air. The investigators combed the car, piecing together fragments of a nightmare that seemed boundless. A single shoe, strangely out of place, lay near the back door, its soles smeared with a reddish-brown stain. Nearby, faint footprints pressed into the dirt suggested a hurried escape or a frantic chase. Law enforcement meticulously assembled the evidence. This crime wasn't just brutal, it was monstrous. Whoever committed it had wanted the body found. Diana Duvet was born on April 18, 1988, in a quaint village in Moldova, into a family that faced significant challenges. Her early childhood was fraught with difficulties. Her parents separated when she was just a toddler, and her father exited her life without a trace. Diana's mother, Elena Duvet, bore the weight of raising her daughter alone, striving to provide for her despite limited resources. Though life was difficult, Elena worked hard, taking on various jobs to support herself and her child. She dreamed of a better future for them both, a dream that eventually led her to make the heartbreaking decision to leave Diana in the care of her loving grandparents while she sought opportunities abroad. Elena's decision to leave was a painful one, but she was driven by the hope of giving Diana a better life. She immigrated to the United States, where she worked tirelessly, doing everything she could to establish a foundation for her family. It wasn't easy, but Elena's resilience and unwavering commitment slowly paid off. Over the years, she met and married William Andrews, a kind and supportive man who embraced both Elena and the idea of becoming a father figure to Diana. Together, they worked toward the dream of reuniting their family. And finally, after years of sacrifice, Elena was able to bring 13-year-old Diana to their home in Vero Beach, Florida in 2001. The move was a turning point for Diana. Although adjusting to a new culture and language posed challenges, her resilience shone through. Diana was determined to succeed. With a tenacious spirit, she learned English rapidly, speaking fluently within months, and her accent faded as she immersed herself in her new environment. Diana thrived academically and socially, her warm and outgoing personality earning her many friends. She excelled in school, achieving excellent grades, which opened doors to opportunities that seemed out of reach just a few years before. During her teenage years, Diana's dreams began to crystallize. Witnessing the struggles of her family and understanding the sacrifices her mother had made for her, Diana developed a deep sense of empathy for others. This compassion steered her toward a career in healthcare, where she believed she could make a meaningful difference in people's lives. After excelling in high school, Diana secured a spot at a prestigious medical college, where she pursued a nursing degree. Diana's dedication paid off, and she eventually became a nurse in the oncology department of a prominent medical center. Her patients and colleagues alike admired her professionalism, unyielding kindness, and heartfelt care. She had a natural ability to connect with people, offering comfort and support during some of the most challenging times of their lives. In early 2013, Diana crossed paths with Mike Jones during an evening out at a popular bar along the Vero Beach coastline. At 31, Mike was 6 years her senior, and he seemed to have his life perfectly in order. He had graduated from the University of Miami with a law degree and worked in the wealth management division at PNC Bank. His polished demeanor and charm quickly drew Diana in. They began dating shortly after exchanging phone numbers, and their connection was immediate. To Diana, Mike seemed like the perfect partner. He was well-educated, confident, and financially stable, a seemingly ideal match for her. Her family, too, welcomed him into their lives. Mike's smooth talk and apparent success were endearing to them, and they believed Diana had found someone who would cherish and support her as she pursued her dreams. But as time passed, cracks in this perfect image began to surface. Initially, Diana was open about her relationship with Mike, sharing stories about their dates and introducing him to her friends. However, as the months went by, her behavior began to change in subtle but troubling ways. Once vibrant and outgoing, she became more reserved, often declining invitations to social gatherings. Her visits to her parents, which had once been frequent and filled with joy, dwindled. Her friends, including her best friend Emily, began to notice a shift in Diana's demeanor. She became secretive, often evading questions about her relationship and leaving people with the sense that something wasn't right. Diana's friends were particularly concerned about the way Mike seemed to exert control over her. During the rare occasions she attended social events, she exhibited behavior that alarmed those who knew her best. She kept her phone constantly within reach, responding immediately to Mike's calls or texts. On several occasions, she excused herself abruptly after receiving messages, claiming she needed to leave. Diana even began parking her car out of sight when visiting friends, an act that seemed incongruous with her previously open and social nature. These changes were subtle but alarming. Diana's friends tried to talk to her about it, but she brushed off their concerns, assuring them that everything was fine. Mike, to everyone on the outside, seemed like the perfect boyfriend, polite, charming, and successful. But the behavior Diana exhibited around him suggested that something darker was at play. Diana's reluctance to confide in her friends and family and her increasing isolation hinted at a growing emotional strain. Over time, it became clear that Mike's influence over her was deepening. It wasn't just that Diana seemed distant. She began to act differently, as if under pressure, unable to act freely or make her own choices. Her increasing anxiety and discomfort around him were evident to those who loved her most. This shift in Diana's behavior was more than just a phase in a young relationship. It was the beginning of a complex dynamic, one that would change the course of her life. Diana's sense of self was gradually being eroded, and her ability to express herself freely seemed to vanish. She was no longer the confident, independent young woman who had once moved across the world to build a new life. Instead, she seemed to be living under the shadow of someone else's control. The struggle to maintain her own identity and her increasing unease with the relationship became her silent burden. But at that point, she had yet to find the strength to walk away. In the months that followed, Diana would continue to face challenges, both internal and external, as she navigated her relationship with Mike. Despite the mounting pressures, she still held on to her dreams of a fulfilling career in healthcare and of one day finding the kind of love that made her feel safe and respected. But for now, Diana was caught in a struggle that she could not yet escape, and it would take more than just the love of her family and friends to help her find her way out. As the pressure continued to mount, the question of what would happen next remained uncertain, as Diana faced the crossroads between love, control, and the search for her own freedom. Emily, in particular, grew concerned. She confronted Diana gently, asking if everything was okay between her and Mike. While Diana initially brushed off these concerns, her vague responses only heightened Emily's suspicion. Emily began to notice subtle signs of tension, like Diana's tendency to flinch at sudden noises, or her visible unease when Mike's name came up in conversation. When Emily pressed further, Diana confessed that Mike could be controlling and that their relationship wasn't as perfect as it seemed. However, Diana downplayed the issues, insisting she could handle them. Despite her reassurances, Diana's family and friends remained uneasy. To them, it seemed that Mike had gradually isolated Diana, exerting a level of control that was deeply unsettling. Yet, Diana's determination to keep up appearances prevented her loved ones from fully grasping the gravity of the situation. Behind closed doors, Diana faced a much darker reality than anyone could have imagined. Mike's controlling tendencies escalated over time, manifesting in ways that were both subtle and overt. He monitored her whereabouts, questioned her about her interactions with others, and discouraged her from spending time with her friends. His jealousy was masked as concern, making it harder for Diana to recognize his behavior as abusive. Over time, this emotional manipulation took a toll on her self-confidence, leaving her questioning her own decisions. One particularly alarming incident occurred several months into their relationship. Diana confided in Emily about a heated argument in which Mike had grabbed her wrist so tightly that it left a bruise. Though Diana tried to downplay the incident, her friend urged her to reconsider the relationship. However, Diana, ever optimistic and empathetic, believed Mike's apologies and promises to change. She explained that he had been under a lot of stress at work and that the incident was a one-time lapse in judgment. For Diana's loved ones, these red flags painted a troubling picture, but they struggled to intervene. Diana's reluctance to share the full extent of her struggles with Mike meant that those who cared for her were left piecing together fragments of a story that only she fully understood. Diana rarely spoke of the turmoil she faced in her personal life. When she did confide in her best friend Emily, it was with hesitation and carefully chosen words, as though she feared revealing too much. Diana admitted wanting to end her relationship with Mike, but seemed immobilized by an intangible fear. Emily, and others close to her, could sense her growing distress, but felt powerless to intervene as Diana's silence created an impenetrable barrier. What made Diana's predicament even more tragic was the stark contrast between her public and private lives. At work, she was a model of strength, compassion, and professionalism. Her patients adored her for the care she provided, and her colleagues respected her as a diligent and reliable nurse. Yet at home, Diana faced a relentless emotional battle. As her relationship with Mike deepened, Diana's independence eroded. Every decision she made became an intricate calculation. Would this upset Mike? Would he approve? Would he become angry? The constant mental toll of second-guessing herself was exhausting, and her once close connections with friends and family became less frequent. Though she never openly voiced her fears, her actions, canceling plans, avoiding family gatherings, and constantly texting Mike, spoke volumes about her growing dependence on him. It was clear to Diana that she had made a grave mistake within 2 months of moving in with Mike. The charming, thoughtful man she had once fallen for disappeared, replaced by someone consumed by jealousy and an obsessive need for control. He monitored her every move, forbade her from seeing friends or visiting her family, and required detailed explanations of where she had been and with whom. Mike's invasiveness extended to Diana's phone and social media, which he scrutinized daily. Any perceived deviation from his expectations led to intense arguments, sometimes escalating to aggression. Yet in public, they maintained the illusion of a happy, harmonious relationship, leaving outsiders none the wiser. Things escalated dangerously on April 30th, 2014. That evening, a concerned neighbor called emergency services after overhearing a loud and prolonged argument from Mike's apartment. The man reported sounds of shouting, banging, and what he believed to be signs of physical violence. He admitted to hearing similar disturbances in the past, but felt this particular fight seemed especially volatile. When police arrived at the scene, they were greeted by Mike, who opened the door with an air of calm and casual surprise. He claimed the noise was merely the result of an intense role-playing game he and Diana were engaged in. His composure was unsettling, but the officers had no immediate evidence to contradict him. Shortly after, Diana emerged from the apartment. Her appearance told a very different story from Mike's claims. She was dressed in disheveled pajamas, her face streaked with tears, and faint marks, consistent with someone being grabbed, were visible on her neck. Though visibly shaken, Diana insisted to the officers that everything was fine and that the argument had been resolved. However, she made it clear she wanted to leave with the police. She quickly gathered a small bag of essentials and left the apartment without looking back. Despite her obvious distress, Diana declined to press charges, repeatedly reassuring the officers and herself that the situation wasn't serious and that she and Mike had worked things out. Following the incident, Diana sought refuge at her parents' home. She confided in her mother about the fight, admitting it was the culmination of months of emotional and verbal abuse. Her mother urged her to cut ties with Mike for good, and Diana agreed, vowing to end the relationship. However, as is often the case in such situations, her resolve wavered. Diana's departure marked a turning point, but it also ignited Mike's more dangerous tendencies. The days following her move to her parents' home were fraught with escalating manipulation. He sent her flowers, left voicemails begging for forgiveness, and even involved mutual friends to mediate on his behalf. While Diana tried to maintain her resolve, Mike's relentless pursuit wore her down. Her friends noticed that she seemed emotionally drained, unable to fully distance herself from him despite her clear desire to end things. One evening in mid-May, Diana's mother found her sitting on the porch, staring blankly into the distance. When asked what was wrong, Diana broke down, confessing that she felt trapped. She admitted she feared Mike's reaction if she severed ties completely, describing incidents where he had hinted at harming himself if she left him. Her mother encouraged her to seek help, suggesting therapy or even a restraining order, but Diana hesitated. She felt ashamed, convinced she could handle the situation on her own. Unbeknownst to Diana, Mike's obsessive behavior extended beyond their interactions. He began tracking her movements, showing up unannounced at her workplace and attempting to follow her when she went out. Diana confided in Emily, who urged her to take action before things escalated further. Still, Diana's compassionate nature and reluctance to involve the authorities left her vulnerable. Her loved ones could only watch helplessly as Diana navigated the increasingly dangerous terrain of her relationship with Mike, hoping she would find the strength to break free. Diana rarely spoke of the turmoil that defined her personal life. When she did open up to her best friend, Emily, it was with extreme caution and deliberate phrasing, as though she feared even her words could have dangerous consequences. She admitted wanting to leave her relationship with Mike, but seemed trapped by a paralyzing mix of fear and uncertainty. Emily and others close to her could only watch helplessly, sensing her growing distress but finding themselves unable to penetrate the walls Diana had built around her struggles. Diana's plight was all the more heartbreaking because of the stark dichotomy between her public and private personas. At work, she was admired as a compassionate, dedicated nurse whose patients and colleagues adored her for her professionalism and warmth. She was a source of light and stability for those in her care. At home, however, Diana battled a deepening emotional storm, one that consumed her piece by piece. This duality is common among individuals in controlling or abusive relationships, where success in public spheres often becomes a coping mechanism, a way to maintain some semblance of control amidst the chaos. What Diana didn't realize was how far Mike's obsession had progressed. He began tracking her movements, showing up unannounced at places she frequented, and even attempting to follow her home from work. He once left a threatening note on the windshield of her car, which shocked her. Diana confided in Emily, who urged her to seek help immediately, warning her that Mike's behavior was spiraling into something far more dangerous. As the weeks went on, Mike's actions became increasingly erratic. He hacked into Diana's social media accounts, scrutinizing her private messages for any perceived betrayal. He began spreading rumors among mutual acquaintances, framing Diana as the unstable one in the relationship to protect his image. These tactics left Diana feeling isolated and unsure of whom she could trust. Her loved ones grew more alarmed, but Diana remained trapped in a web of fear, guilt, and manipulation. For those who cared about her, the growing danger was palpable, and they could only hope Diana would take action before it was too late. By the evening of June 20th, Elena was frantic with worry. Her daughter's unexplained silence had stretched into hours, each passing minute intensifying her dread. Diana was reliable, always responsive to calls or texts, and her sudden absence was deeply uncharacteristic. Unable to shake the foreboding feeling that something was terribly wrong, Elena drove to the police station to file a missing persons report. The officers listened empathetically and assured her that they would investigate. However, as Diana was an adult, they explained that official protocols required waiting 24 hours before formally beginning a search, unless evidence of foul play emerged. For Elena and her family, this delay felt like an eternity. After some time, Diana never showed up and the police began a search. The initial stages of the investigation focused on tracing Diana's phone. Her last known location placed her near Mike Jones's neighborhood, strengthening the suspicions of her loved ones who had long been uneasy about the relationship. Attempts to contact Mike proved fruitless. Calls went unanswered, and his phone was also switched off. Meanwhile, Diana's family, desperate for answers, drove to Mike's condo and parked outside, hoping he would return. When he failed to appear, their unease deepened. Law enforcement quickly moved to secure a warrant to search his residence, given the mounting evidence and testimonies from those close to Diana. Upon entering Mike's condo, police found the space disturbingly pristine. The air of normalcy was unsettling, with no signs of struggle or evidence pointing to Diana's whereabouts. The investigators meticulously combed through the apartment, searching for anything that might provide a clue. Hidden messages, misplaced items, or anything suspiciously missing. Yet, the scene was barren of definitive leads, amplifying fears about Diana's fate. A message Diana had sent Elena earlier in another language was reviewed carefully. Though Elena confirmed it matched Diana's usual style, investigators couldn't ignore the possibility that someone else could have sent it to mislead them. Diana's best friend, Emily, came forward with critical information. She provided the police with pictures of bruises on Diana's neck from a prior altercation with Mike. Emily explained how Diana had hesitated to report his behavior, fearing retaliation. She recounted Diana's growing anxiety over the past months, emphasizing that her friend had often downplayed the danger she faced to protect her parents from worrying. This new information further underscored the serious threat Mike posed, shifting the investigation into high gear. Police discovered he had briefly reported to work on June 20th but left early, citing illness. Surveillance footage revealed that before vanishing, he had withdrawn $3 only in cash from his bank account and turned off his phone. As investigators dug deeper into his past, a disturbing pattern of behavior emerged. Years earlier, Mike had been convicted of stalking and assaulting a former girlfriend. After serving probation, he changed his last name and relocated to Vero Beach, seeking a fresh start. Additional records surfaced of another ex-girlfriend who had filed a harassment complaint against him, though she later withdrew the charges. This history painted a troubling portrait of a man with a history of escalating violence in relationships. Investigators turned their attention to two vehicles, Mike's gold Honda Accord and Diana's black Nissan Altima. Both were flagged for immediate tracking. Mike's last phone ping placed him in an area roughly 30 minutes north of Vero Beach, prompting a focused search in that vicinity. By the evening of June 21st, his car was discovered parked outside a modest suburban motel. Inside, the motel receptionist instantly recognized Mike from a photograph provided by law enforcement. The employee recounted that Mike had checked in the previous day, paid in cash, and specifically requested privacy. He had insisted no calls or messages be directed to his room, a behavior that struck the receptionist as odd, but not alarming enough to report at the time. The discovery of Mike's location heightened the urgency of the investigation, but it also introduced a chilling uncertainty. While police were relieved to have a lead, they couldn't shake the nagging question. Was Diana still alive? A tactical team was assembled to approach Mike's room cautiously. As they surveilled the motel, officers noted that the curtains in his room were tightly drawn, and no light seeped through the edges of the windows. After assessing the situation, law enforcement knocked on the door, identifying themselves as police. When no response came, they were forced to breach the room. Inside, the scene was haunting. The room was dimly lit, with blinds fully shut, and the air smelled faintly of cleaning supplies. Police found Mike sitting on the edge of the bed, his demeanor unnervingly calm. A backpack filled with cash, a burner phone, and several changes of clothes sat by his side, a clear indication that he had been planning to flee. When questioned, he maintained his innocence, claiming he had no idea where Diana was and hadn't seen her since the evening of June 19th. His nonchalance infuriated the officers, but without Diana's whereabouts or evidence tying him directly to her disappearance, they couldn't immediately charge him. As police searched the room, their attention was drawn to a pair of muddy shoes near the door and a faint trail of dirt leading to the bathroom. Inside, they discovered a damp towel and a partially emptied bottle of bleach. These items were confiscated as potential evidence, though they stopped short of providing direct answers. Back at headquarters, investigators worked tirelessly to reconstruct Mike's movements in the days leading up to Diana's disappearance, hoping to uncover the break they needed to solve the case. Volunteer groups combed through wooded areas, empty lots, and nearby waterways, focusing their efforts around Mike Jones's last known locations. Law enforcement intensified their efforts, broadening the scope of the investigation to include individuals who might have assisted Mike. Potential safe houses, previous associates, and even local businesses were scrutinized. New leads began to emerge, sparked by the growing public interest. A gas station attendant came forward with a significant account. Mike had been seen on the morning of June 20th, appearing unkempt and hurried. Surveillance footage corroborated the sighting, showing Mike purchasing a suspiciously large quantity of bottled water and cleaning supplies. The purchase raised red flags, suggesting premeditation and an attempt to cover up incriminating evidence. A search of the room yielded several suspicious items. Among them was a disposable burner phone, purchased that same day. A receipt in Mike's belongings led investigators to a nearby Walmart, where they obtained surveillance footage. The grainy video showed Mike exiting a vehicle resembling Diana's black Nissan Altima. He entered the store, paid cash for the phone, and returned to the car. Notably, Diana was nowhere to be seen in the footage, further solidifying fears about her safety. Using phone records, detectives traced Mike's movements. After activating the burner phone briefly in the Melbourne suburbs, he had used it to call a cab before turning it off again. The cab driver, when interviewed, described Mike as visibly agitated but polite. The driver recalled him mentioning a recent breakup and provided details of the pickup location, a Publix shopping center. This information proved pivotal. Upon arriving at the shopping center, police found Diana's Nissan Altima discreetly parked in a remote section of the lot. The discovery of the car brought a chilling breakthrough. On June 22, 2014, 3 days after Diana was last seen, officers opened the trunk and found her lifeless body. The Florida heat had accelerated decomposition, but the autopsy later revealed the full extent of the violence she had endured. Diana Duvet was strangled. The medical examiner confirmed the cause of death as manual strangulation, indicating that her attacker applied severe pressure to her neck. Neck injuries. Her neck displayed extensive bruising and internal damage consistent with severe and prolonged strangulation. This level of force suggested that the killer was determined to ensure she would not survive. Defensive wounds. Diana had bruises and abrasions on her arms and hands consistent with defensive wounds, indicating that she violently resisted her attacker in an attempt to protect herself. Evidence of blunt force trauma. While strangulation was the primary cause of death, additional injuries were noted on her body, including bruises on her head and face. These injuries suggest she may have been struck or beaten before or during the strangulation. Condition of the body. Her body was found wrapped in a black garbage bag, and the way it was placed in the trunk suggested an attempt to conceal the crime. This was seen as a sign of premeditation or, at the very least, an effort by the perpetrator to hide evidence. With Diana's body recovered, the case shifted from a missing persons investigation to a homicide. Public outcry intensified as details of her murder came to light. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Mike maintained his innocence, denying any involvement. Investigators, however, were piecing together a damning timeline. They believed that after Diana's final goodbye to her friends on the night of June 19, Mike lured her back to his apartment under the pretense of reconciliation. Diana, ever trusting and empathetic, likely agreed in hopes of finding closure. Instead, she walked into a trap. In parallel, law enforcement dug deeper into Mike's history, uncovering even darker truths. Interviews with past girlfriends revealed chilling similarities: controlling behavior, veiled threats, and escalating violence when his authority was challenged. One former partner, who had moved out of state to escape him, described Mike as a master manipulator who knew exactly how to blend charm with intimidation. This pattern made it clear that Diana's death was not an isolated act of rage, but part of a broader cycle of abuse. The prosecution began building its case with meticulous precision. DNA evidence from Diana's body and fibers from Mike's car linked him directly to the crime. Witness testimony painted a vivid picture of a man unraveling under the weight of his possessiveness and rage. As the trial date approached, Diana's family faced the painful task of sitting through court proceedings that detailed her suffering. But their presence served as a powerful reminder of the lives forever altered by her loss. In the months following Diana's death, her story became a rallying cry for domestic violence awareness. Advocacy groups launched campaigns in her name, highlighting the warning signs of coercive control and urging victims to seek help before it was too late. For Elena, this offered a sliver of solace amid the unending ache of losing her daughter. Diana's best friend, Emily, had long warned her about Mike's manipulative tendencies, but Diana remained optimistic, wanting to believe that he would honor her decision. The message she sent her mother in another language Mike didn't understand offered no hints of distress, suggesting that by the time she sent it, she hadn't yet realized the danger she was in. Police reconstructed the events of that night and concluded that Diana and Mike likely argued as soon as they entered his apartment. The confrontation escalated quickly, with Mike's temper spiraling out of control. In the enclosed privacy of his garage, Mike likely snapped. Investigators theorized that after the argument turned physical, Diana tried to defend herself, which only enraged Mike further. Her screams, loud enough to risk alerting neighbors, prompted him to silence her by force. He grabbed her by the throat and, in his fury, strangled her until she stopped breathing. The horrifying scene marked the end of Diana's life. Mike's actions following her death were coldly methodical. He dragged Diana's lifeless body to the garage, placed her in the trunk of her own car, and drove through the night to find a remote location to abandon the vehicle. He left the Nissan in a discreet corner of the shopping center parking lot, ensuring it wouldn't be discovered immediately. By the time the sun rose, he was already on his way back home via taxi, attempting to resume normalcy to cover his tracks. He went to work, withdrew cash, and informed his employer he'd be taking time off, all the while pretending nothing had happened. Additionally, forensic evidence from the car linked Mike to the crime. His fingerprints were found on the inside of the trunk, and fibers matching his clothing were discovered near Diana's body. DNA evidence confirmed his presence in the car, solidifying the case against him. As the investigation deepened, the psychological portrait of Mike emerged. Colleagues described him as charming but volatile, a man who could switch from friendly to furious in an instant. His past girlfriends, contacted by police, recounted chillingly similar experiences of possessiveness, verbal abuse, and physical aggression. Some admitted they feared for their lives during their relationships with him. Mike Jones was the embodiment of a double life. On the surface, he was the golden boy from a wealthy, well-connected family, gifted with charm and intelligence. He had graduated from one of the nation's most prestigious law schools, quickly climbing the corporate ladder to become a star employee at a major bank. With his polished demeanor and impeccable manners, Jones was seen as the epitome of professionalism and success. His colleagues respected him, supervisors praised him, and clients trusted him. Letters of appreciation and awards adorned his office, painting the picture of a man destined for greatness. But beneath this veneer of perfection lay a man skilled in deception and manipulation. From a young age, Mike had grown accustomed to using others to his advantage. Whether it was through charm, lies, intimidation, or even veiled threats, he knew how to bend situations to his will. He was a pathological liar, crafting elaborate stories about his life depending on his audience. To one group, he claimed he had pulled himself out of poverty. To another, he was a lottery winner who built his fortune through luck and determination. Some believed he was distantly related to a former president, a fabrication he delivered with such conviction that it became almost impossible to question. Photos of him smiling with dignitaries at these events were used to bolster his reputation. Ironically, his involvement in such causes only added to the shock when the truth about his abusive nature surfaced. His entire life was an act, a carefully constructed facade that concealed his controlling, violent tendencies. 5.5 years after Diana's brutal murder, her family and friends were determined to see justice served. Diana's mother, devastated by the loss of her daughter, pushed for the harshest penalty, the death sentence. The prosecution presented a chilling account of Diana and Mike's relationship, which had devolved from seemingly perfect to horrifyingly abusive. Photos taken by Diana's best friend, Emily, showed bruises around Diana's neck, vivid reminders of the physical violence she endured. Emily testified about the fear Diana had expressed in their conversations, sharing how her friend had confided that Mike was growing more controlling and aggressive. Emily's testimony was corroborated by 2 of Mike's ex-girlfriends, who recounted eerily similar stories of how Mike's charm had initially won them over before his true, abusive nature began to surface. They described how he manipulated and isolated them, using psychological and physical abuse to maintain control. The evidence from Mike's garage sealed his fate. Forensic investigators uncovered blood spatter on the walls, barely noticeable to the naked eye, that matched Diana's DNA. They also discovered strands of Diana's hair and bloodstains on a heavy tool found in a discarded box. The prosecution argued that the tool had been used to deliver the fatal blows to Diana's head before she was strangled. These discoveries painted a grim picture of her final moments and undermined the defense's argument that her death was an accident. Despite the defense's attempts to argue that the killing was not premeditated, the jury was unconvinced. The prosecution's narrative, supported by the weight of evidence and emotional testimonies, left little room for doubt. After hours of deliberation, the jury found Mike Jones guilty of first-degree murder and evidence tampering. However, while Diana's family had hoped for the death penalty, the court sentenced Jones to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The quiet morning was shattered by an ominous 911 call. A piercing scream was heard, abruptly cut off by sharp interference, and then the connection was lost. The crime was so shocking in its execution that it left the police feeling physically ill. The twisted fantasies of the perpetrator horrified even the most seasoned investigators. The victim's body had endured unimaginable torment. Her hands were bound, and there was not a single unmarked spot left on her body. The criminal had acted out his depraved sexual fantasies in a horrifying manner. The question that haunted the police was, how could someone act with such cruelty and harbor such sick desires? What unfolded in that house was far more than murder. It was a grotesque and calculated act of inhumanity. On December 1, 2011, the serene town of Deer Park, Washington, awoke beneath a pristine frost-laden blanket, the icy morning air announcing the arrival of another winter day. Encircled by the endless stretch of evergreens and sprawling farmland, this quaint town of just over 3,000 residents embodied the quintessential charm of rural Americana. In Deer Park, life was measured in gentle cadences marked by neighborly gestures, shared tales over mugs of hot coffee, and the collective excitement for the forthcoming Christmas celebrations. Each house strung with shimmering lights and wreaths painted a festive scene, wrapping the town in a sense of warmth, togetherness, and cheer that defined its spirit. As the first rays of dawn crept over the rooftops, the town began to stir to life, and at 509 North Riper Street, the Starbuck family home was no exception. Their snug house, guarded by tall, sentinel-like pines, was a repository of years of laughter, tears, and perseverance. At the heart of this home was Channon Starbuck, a woman whose vitality and warmth touched everything she did. Born on April 1969, Channon was raised in a nurturing, faith-centered household where love, community, and a steadfast belief in the goodness of others shaped her childhood. From her earliest days, Channon displayed boundless creativity and a sincere kindness that drew people to her. Whether in the form of her vivid paintings or the intricate details of her sketches, her art was an expression of her exuberant imagination and compassionate spirit, providing glimpses into the depth of her character. Steeped in strong religious principles from a young age, she was not content to be just a participant in church activities but emerged as a leader. Her passion for organizing events and mentoring younger members of the congregation showcased her innate talent for uniting people, to friends and neighbors alike. Channon was much more than a familiar, cheerful face. She was a beacon of hope, her deeds speaking volumes of her inner strength and sense of mission. Beyond her church, Channon's altruism knew no bounds. Whether by volunteering at local charities or offering a listening ear and comforting words to friends in distress, she personified pure generosity. It was these seemingly small, genuine gestures that left an indelible mark on those fortunate enough to cross her path, solidifying the memory of a life driven by love and empathy. Channon's academic path began at Lake Mary High School, where she graduated in 1987. With a clear vision for her future, she pursued a career in art therapy, blending her passion for creativity with a desire to heal and uplift. Her college years started at Florida State University and later transitioned to a nearby college, a testament to her perseverance and ambition. Channon's dedication to her craft earned her scholarships, accolades, and, more importantly, the admiration and respect of her peers. Through her work as an art therapist, she provided a light for others, using her talent as a bridge toward hope and self-discovery. In 1989, Channon's path took an unforeseen yet exhilarating turn when she met Clay Starbuck at a church event. Clay, an adventurous spirit with a rugged background shaped by years spent working on Alaska's pipeline and the experience of fatherhood child from previous marriage, brought excitement and energy into Channon's life. Their romance blossomed with fervor, culminating in a wedding on June 1, 1990 in Florida. To Channon, stepping into her new roles as wife and stepmother was a profound act of love, one she embraced with unwavering commitment and compassion. The couple's move to Valdez, Alaska, marked the start of a life filled with contrasts. The breathtaking scenery and natural wonder set against the backdrop of isolation and relentless winters. Despite these challenges, Channon met each day with a hopeful heart and an enduring sense of resilience. Clay's work often took him away for extended periods, but Channon adeptly managed their household, becoming the steadfast anchor for her family. Her ability to weather the difficulties of remote life and her nurturing spirit demonstrated her unwavering fortitude. The couple's life was punctuated by moments of struggle and joy as they balanced their dreams, children, and the demands of life in one of America's most remote corners. However, beneath the surface of Channon's seemingly perfect world lay the inevitable complexities of life. The challenges she faced went beyond the biting cold of Alaskan winters, or the solitude that came with raising children while Clay was away. There were moments of doubt, the strain of separation, and the emotional toll of maintaining a brave face for her family. As the years passed, the family eventually resettled in Washington, seeking new opportunities and a semblance of stability. For Channon, the return to a more connected environment allowed her to rediscover some of the communal joys that had been more challenging in the isolation of Alaska. Yet even with the return to a bustling community life, her devotion to her children and their well-being remained paramount. She gave birth to her first son, Austin, at the age of 21, followed by Blake, and later, girl Logan. When Logan was diagnosed with autism, Channon's life took on a new level of challenge and meaning. Rather than feeling defeated by the difficulties associated with raising a child with special needs, she worked tirelessly to ensure that Logan had the best resources, care, and educational opportunities available. From meetings with specialists to advocating for inclusive programs, Channon's days were filled with the kind of determination and love that could move mountains. Her commitment underscored her deep-rooted belief in the importance of family, resilience, and the support of a strong, compassionate community. As time passed, the Starbuck family expanded, with the arrival of daughter Serena, completing their bustling household. Outwardly, they projected an image of a thriving family, yet beneath this surface, subtle fractures in Channon and Clay's marriage began to form. Clay's frequent absences due to his demanding job in Alaska placed a significant strain on their relationship. Compounding the strain was an extramarital affair that further eroded trust and opened an emotional chasm between them. Their contrasting views on faith added another layer of tension. This dissonance culminated in suspicions and accusations of infidelity directed at Channon, allegations she vehemently denied, which only served to deepen the rift between them. After years of strain, the marriage finally reached its breaking point. In March 2000, at the age of 30, Channon's marriage to Clay officially ended in divorce. With hope and resilience as her guiding stars, she relocated to Arizona with her children, determined to rebuild their lives and carve out a path forward. She soon found herself in a new relationship, seeking the comfort and security she craved. However, feelings for Clay still lingered, and a sense of unfinished emotional business compelled her to reach out to him a few months later. Channon's willingness to pursue reconciliation spoke volumes about her capacity for forgiveness and hope, embodying her deep belief in second chances. By 2001, the family reunited in Alaska, rekindling their life together. The reunion was marked by the birth of Marshall, a moment of joy complicated by Clay's suspicions about Marshall's paternity, born from Channon's time in Arizona. Yet Clay made the choice to embrace Marshall, and the family moved forward with a shared hope for stability. On December 29, 2006, after years of weathering storms and rebuilding trust, Channon and Clay found a semblance of peace and mutual understanding. It appeared that their long journey through strife had led them to calmer waters. The family's relocation to Deer Park in May 2008 was another effort to foster stability. They did not remarry and continued their relationship as good friends, living in separate houses close to each other. Clay continued his job in Alaska while Channon focused on nurturing their children and becoming an active part of the community, immersing herself in church and other local activities. Between June and November 2011, an unsettling series of events began to unfold that hinted at the shadows encroaching on Channon's new life. She reported a string of suspicious incidents to the local police, convinced that someone had been entering her home while she was away. Each episode added to her growing sense of unease. Unscrewed light bulbs in her garage, a barbecue grill inexplicably knocked over, and suspicious tampering with a truck she had borrowed from a friend. These signs pointed to an unseen presence, an intruder who toyed with the fragile sense of safety she had painstakingly built. Personal items, including cherished jewelry and even a firearm, mysteriously disappeared from Channon's home, deepening her sense of vulnerability. The unsettling nature of these events compelled Channon to take urgent measures to protect her family. She meticulously taped doors to monitor potential intrusions and installed a surveillance camera in her kitchen, clear signs of her growing anxiety and resolve to secure her home environment. Each step represented both a defensive measure against the unknown and a testament to Channon's determination to shield her children from harm. Channon's resolve never wavered, even as these events unsettled her life. She doubled down on protecting her children. Friends noticed that while Channon's smile and warmth never completely faltered, there was an underlying weariness that suggested the toll these trials were taking. Yet she continued to pour her heart into her art and community, striving to be a source of light despite the shadows that loomed over her. Adding to her emotional burden, financial difficulties loomed large. Clay's debilitating back injury in February 2011 left him unable to work, though he received disability benefits. However, this income fell short of covering his $5,000 monthly child support obligations, placing a heavy financial strain on Channon. She bore the brunt of the family's economic struggles, juggling overdue utility bills, facing disconnections, dealing with the repossession of her car, and staring down the specter of eviction. The situation reached a critical point in October 2011, when a court ruling ordered Clay to pay over $99,000 in unpaid child support and court fees. Additionally, the court granted Channon half of Clay's pension. While this was a significant legal victory for her, it only stoked the embers of Clay's anger, worsening an already volatile relationship. Amid the turmoil and uncertainties, Channon achieved a significant milestone that summer of 2011. At 42 years old, she graduated with honors from an intensive dental hygiene program, a victory hard won through determination and late-night study sessions. With her diploma in hand, she embarked on a new career path, ready to build a more stable future for herself and her children. This newfound independence fueled her confidence and motivated her to step back into the realm of social interaction, leading her to create a profile on a dating website. It was a simple but bold step that underscored her desire to rediscover herself as an individual, apart from the years of marital strife. However, this small act of self-reclamation provoked a severe reaction from Clay. His intrusion was both technical and deeply personal. Utilizing hacking software, he breached her laptop, monitoring her messages, online activities, and correspondence. This breach of privacy was more than an invasion. It was the launch of a psychological campaign aimed at destabilizing Channon's life and undermining her self-worth. Clay's focus became disturbingly pointed, with much of his attention directed at turning their youngest son, Marshall, against her. In a particularly damaging episode, Clay showed Marshall explicit photos of Channon, images she had shared in trust during private conversations with others. Using his finger to obscure parts of the images, Clay spun a narrative to Marshall that painted Channon in a derogatory and shaming light. This manipulative act was designed not only to vilify Channon, but also to drive a wedge between her and her children, distorting their perceptions of their mother. Channon's documentation of these relentless assaults was both revealing and heartrending. In her journal, she recounted the emotional fallout from Clay's actions, providing a window into her mental and emotional state. One entry from September 2011 stands out, capturing the pain and confusion Marshall experienced. Marshall was upset after spending the day with his father. He said that his father showed him several pictures from my phone. One was allegedly a nude photo of me, with his father covering my breasts with his finger. His father told him that I had sent these photos to men. The entry spoke volumes, laying bare the profound damage Clay's actions inflicted, not only on Channon, but on their children, who were innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire of adult conflicts. Clay's vendetta extended beyond the boundaries of their household. Fueled by resentment, he set out to tarnish Channon's reputation within the wider community. Through whispered conversations and unfounded accusations, he painted her as promiscuous and neglectful, casting aspersions that chipped away at the support she found in her social circles. This campaign of defamation exacerbated Channon's feelings of isolation, leaving her to grapple with an ever-growing sense of betrayal and loneliness. Yet, despite these relentless trials, Channon displayed an extraordinary resilience. The months following were marked by a series of poignant and revealing moments. Channon's artistry became not just a creative outlet, but a therapeutic expression of her inner struggles and hopes. Paintings filled with vivid, hopeful colors coexisted with darker sketches that mirrored the tension that threatened to unravel her life. Friends who saw her work noted its emotional depth, a silent testament to Channon's inner battles and unyielding spirit. By December 1, 2011, Channon seemed ready for a fresh chapter in her life. She had taken significant strides to regain control and was intent on building a promising future for herself and her children. That morning began as usual, with Channon's early tweet at 6:29 a.m. suggesting a sense of normalcy. Soon after, Clay contacted her, claiming that his car had broken down and asking her to help by taking their children to school. Always prioritizing her family, Channon agreed and returned home by 7:11 a.m., taking a moment to message a friend to arrange a meeting later in the day. This message, unknowingly, would be her last verified communication. At 9:18 a.m., an eerie 911 call was placed from Channon's phone. The dispatcher heard what seemed to be a high-pitched scream followed by static, after which the line disconnected abruptly. Although it was an alarming call, no officers were dispatched, an oversight that would later haunt the investigation and leave vital questions unanswered. From noon until 4 p.m., a surge of messages totaling 11 outgoing and 99 incoming emanated from Channon's phone. These were not written by her, but by her killer, who demonstrated an unsettling grasp of her habits and communication style, down to the affectionate nickname Marsh for her son, Marshall. At 3:17 p.m., the phone sent one final text to Clay mentioning a headache and asking him to pick up the children from school. Clay claimed he did not see this message until 3:37 p.m., citing that his phone had been off earlier. However, by this time, Austin, their oldest son, had already collected his younger siblings from school. That evening, the family, expecting to meet Channon at Blake's basketball game at Deer Park High School, grew uneasy when she failed to show up. At 5:45 p.m., Clay sent Channon a message, offering to meet her at the entrance so she would not have to pay for entry. When she still did not arrive, Clay and the children drove to her home. They found the doors locked, the lights turned off, and nothing suspicious visible through the windows when they shone their flashlights inside. Believing she was not there, they returned to Clay's house. The absence of school supplies and essential items prompted the younger children to miss school the next day, escalating concern within the family. By December 2, 2011, as over 24 hours passed with no word from Channon, worry intensified. Melanie, Channon's mother living in Florida, grew increasingly distressed when Channon's voicemail was full, and her repeated attempts to contact her daughter yielded no response. At 5 p.m., Melanie called emergency services, pleading for a welfare check on Channon's home. At 6:15 p.m., officers arrived at the scene, noting a package left on the doorstep that had gone uncollected. They circled the house, peering through the windows. At first glance, nothing seemed amiss. However, upon entry, they discovered a chilling scene. Channon's body lay in her bedroom, partially dressed in a disheveled robe, her hands bound. The examination that followed revealed she had endured a brutal and prolonged ordeal. Medical examiners documented her injuries in stark detail. Multiple broken ribs. Channon suffered 10 fractured ribs, injuries consistent with forceful trauma applied during the assault. Crushed larynx. This significant damage indicated sustained pressure to her neck, pointing to strangulation. Stun gun marks. Her body bore multiple indications of a stun gun's use, which likely contributed to her immobilization and extreme pain. Approximately 90 external injuries. Bruises, abrasions, and other signs of repeated trauma were evident on various parts of her body. Asphyxiation. The cause of death was determined to be slow asphyxiation, marked by the filling of her lungs with fluid over the course of about 2 hours. Moreover, details at the scene suggested a calculated effort to mislead investigators into believing a sexual assault had taken place. A bottle of lubricant was conspicuously placed on the nightstand, and a vibrator was left in her body, arranged in a manner that was inconsistent with Channon's modest nature and religious beliefs. These elements painted a picture of a staged scenario intended to obscure the true motive and misdirect the investigation. The aftermath of the discovery sent shockwaves through Deer Park, a town unaccustomed to such violence. Friends and neighbors were blindsided by the news, unable to reconcile the tragedy with the woman they knew. Channon, a devoted mother and cherished member of her community, had become the victim of a heinous crime that stripped away the peace of this tight-knit town. In the days that followed, investigators pieced together the story of Channon's last hours, delving into her past and present to uncover potential motives and suspects. Suspicion fell heavily on Clay, whose behavior and inconsistent accounts during the critical time frame raised many questions. The absence of surveillance evidence corroborating his version of events further amplified these doubts. It was clear that whoever had taken her life had acted with cruelty and a calculated intent to inflict suffering, leaving behind not just a scene of violence, but a chasm of grief and unanswered questions that would haunt her family and community. The combination of Channon's severe injuries and the protracted nature of her assault pointed unmistakably to an intensely personal and calculated motive. Among the unsettling elements of the crime scene was an open safe containing various sex toys, a jarring contrast to Channon's reputation as a conservative, devout woman. When Clay arrived at Channon's home after being informed of her murder, He seemed cooperative and forthcoming. He offered a series of theories to investigators, implying that one of the men she had encountered through online dating could be responsible. Clay detailed the dating platforms Channon had used and described her interactions on these sites with surprising precision. However, during the interrogation, his behavior was erratic, marked by abrupt shifts between dramatic displays of grief, crying and yelling, and moments of strategic composure, during which he methodically directed suspicion away from himself. It soon emerged that Clay's knowledge of Channon's online activities was the result of spyware he had surreptitiously installed on her computer. This invasion of privacy reflected a pattern of obsessive and controlling behavior. The spyware, which allowed him to access private photos and communications, was part of a broader campaign Clay had waged to monitor and undermine Channon. In the months leading up to her death, his actions became increasingly alarming. He spread derogatory rumors about her supposed promiscuity and criticized her dating life in conversations with mutual acquaintances, including their shared dentist and members of their church. These efforts painted a portrait of a man fixated on discrediting his ex-wife and maintaining power over her even after their separation. Clay later stated he spent the day preoccupied with fixing his vehicle, detailing that he made repeated trips between his home and the car. Yet, when investigators later reviewed surveillance footage from cameras positioned along his alleged route, he was nowhere to be found. This glaring discrepancy would become a significant factor in casting doubt on his alibi. Channon was acutely aware of Clay's controlling nature and volatile temper. She confided in friends and even voiced her concerns to professionals within her circle. In a particularly unsettling conversation with her dentist, Channon expressed genuine fear that Clay might harm her to avoid paying child support. This worry was rooted in reality. In October 2011, a court had ordered Clay to pay over $99,000 in overdue child support and court fees. This decision, which also granted Channon half of his pension, left Clay embittered and increasingly resentful. Clay's behavior in the aftermath of the murder raised further red flags. He worked to shape the narrative, emphasizing Channon's alleged relationships and her dating habits to divert suspicion. His alibi, however, failed to withstand scrutiny. Although he claimed to have spent the day working on a broken car and walking back and forth between it and his house, surveillance footage along the route showed no evidence of his presence. Moreover, his decision to switch off his phone during critical hours of the day only deepened investigators' doubts about his version of events. Despite his outward cooperation, his attempts to guide the investigation and his invasive surveillance methods spoke of a man determined to keep control even after Channon's tragic death. The breakthrough in the case came through forensic science. Advanced Y-chromosome short tandem repeat analysis provided conclusive evidence. Investigators discovered DNA from Clay's paternal lineage on Channon's neck, face, and beneath her fingernails, damning traces that solidified the case against him. As Clay and his older sons, Austin and Blake, did not live with Channon, their DNA had no reason to be present on her body. The only male in the household was her youngest son, Marshall, whose DNA did not match Clay's, corroborating that he was not Clay's biological child. This revelation not only validated Clay's past suspicions about Marshall's paternity, but also highlighted an additional, deep-seated animosity that likely fueled his rage. Further cementing the case was the discovery of Clay's sperm on Channon's body. This crucial evidence underscored his involvement, ruling out any possibility of framing by an outside party. Austin and Blake both had solid alibis for the day of the murder, eliminating them as suspects. The timeline and forensic findings left Clay as the only logical suspect. The details revealed by the autopsy painted a harrowing picture of Channon's final hours. Modern technology provided crucial insights into piecing together the final timeline of events surrounding Channon's death. Data extracted from Channon's fitness app indicated that her phone ceased recording any significant movement at precisely 8 a.m. on December 1, aligning with her anticipated return home after dropping off her children at school. Just 15 minutes later, at 8:19 a.m., her phone registered 14 additional steps, a chilling detail likely reflecting her desperate struggle during the initial moments of her attack. Around this critical time, a fragmented 911 call was placed from her device, though it failed to convey a clear message to dispatchers. Simultaneously, Data from Clay's fitness tracker revealed increased physical exertion and a marked rise in heart rate, aligning him unmistakably with the timeline of the crime. Clay's deliberate and premeditated actions were brought to light through a review of his internet search history. Investigators discovered that he had searched for topics such as how to dispose of a wife, Hindu funeral rites, and claiming life insurance after a spouse's death. These disturbing searches provided further confirmation that Channon's murder had been meticulously planned well in advance. On the morning of December 1, Clay carefully orchestrated a sequence of events designed to isolate Channon. By messaging her about his car trouble, he ensured she would take their children to school, creating a window of opportunity when the house was empty and vulnerable. The scene Clay left behind bore all the hallmarks of strategic manipulation. Channon's body was staged in a way that suggested a sexually motivated crime, mirroring the pose that a man from an online dating interaction had once requested of her. This detail was designed to mislead authorities and reinforce the idea that her murder was connected to her dating life. Such elaborate staging was meant to divert attention from Clay while further attacking Channon's character, a final act of control and defamation. In a methodical effort to cover his tracks, Clay used Channon's phone throughout the day to send deceptive messages to friends and family. These messages, written in Channon's style and employing familiar terms of affection, created the illusion that she was still alive and maintaining her routine. One such message was sent to Clay himself, in which Channon claimed to be unwell and asked him to pick up their children from school. This ruse bought Clay additional time and reinforced his constructed alibi, delaying the discovery of her death and complicating the investigation. The roots of Clay's obsession and control over Channon ran deep, predating the end of their marriage. His behavior was emblematic of an individual unable to relinquish his perceived authority over her. In the months leading up to the murder, he embarked on a campaign to discredit Channon, spreading rumors that cast her as promiscuous and irresponsible, and manipulating others' perceptions to alienate her from the community and even from her children. The investigation into Channon's death laid bare that her murder was not the outcome of a spontaneous act of rage, but the culmination of years of control, resentment, and manipulation. Clay's profound resentment of Channon's independence, from her career pursuits to her personal life post-divorce, festered and ultimately transformed into a lethal motive. The repercussions of Channon's murder radiated beyond the immediate horror of her loss. Her children, already struggling with the fractured dynamic of their parents' relationship, were thrust into a new and traumatic reality, dealing with their mother's violent death while facing the grim truth of their father's culpability. For Marshall, the youngest, the situation was even more harrowing as it surfaced questions of paternity and betrayal that added layers of confusion and pain to an already tragic narrative. The community that had once been a source of comfort for Channon reacted with a mix of disbelief and sorrow. The staging of the crime scene and Clay's subsequent efforts to mar her reputation failed to obscure the true nature of the woman they had known. The toll this crime exacted on the Starbuck children was profound and multi-layered. The older sons, Austin and Blake, who had been living with Clay post-divorce, remained loyal to their father throughout the investigation and subsequent trial. Their steadfast support showcased their deep-seated denial, portraying the police's case as an unjust persecution rather than a legitimate pursuit of justice. They maintained that Clay's physical condition, marked by chronic back pain and a routine of frequent naps, aligned with his alibi, and they pointed to Marshall, the youngest, who testified that he had seen Clay at home during the time in question, complicating the prosecution's timeline. Austin and Blake's dismissal of the DNA evidence underscored the strong influence Clay had maintained over them, long predating Channon's death. They openly questioned the reliability of the forensic findings, suggesting that their father's genetic material could have been left in the home from prior visits. Investigators later noted how Clay's behavior had subtly yet systematically alienated the children from their mother. Clay's arrest on February 6, 2012, was a significant turning point, marking the cessation of his immediate influence over the children. The court mandated that Clay refrain from contacting the younger children until they reached adulthood, recognizing the manipulative behavior he exhibited. Though necessary for their safety and well-being, this separation added another layer of emotional complexity to an already strained family dynamic. The absence of their father, once a central figure, imposed a stark void amidst their grief for their mother and the disintegration of their familial structure. The fallout from Channon's murder thrust the children into a precarious and traumatic state. Orphaned by circumstance, deprived of their mother through violence and their father through incarceration, they were left to navigate life with scant parental guidance. The financial burden only compounded their struggle. Community members and close friends banded together, forming trust funds and organizing fundraising efforts to ensure that the children's basic needs were met. Yet despite these compassionate gestures, the emotional scars were far deeper, manifesting in ways that would haunt them for years to come. Clay Starbuck's trial commenced in May 2013, and the prosecution laid out a comprehensive case illustrating a murder driven by jealousy, resentment, and an obsessive need for control. The narrative was fortified by the testimony of over 70 witnesses, painting Clay as a deeply manipulative and controlling individual who meticulously orchestrated Channon's murder over several months. Key pieces of evidence included DNA findings, which revealed traces of Clay's DNA on Channon's neck, face, and under her fingernails, as well as sperm found on her body that matched his genetic profile. His internet search history, containing queries such as how to dispose of a wife and claiming life insurance after a spouse's death, bolstered the prosecution's argument for premeditation. Additionally, data extracted from Channon's fitness app synchronized seamlessly with the timeline of the crime. In response, the defense sought to discredit the DNA evidence, arguing the possibility of contamination or pre-existing DNA traces. They highlighted an unidentified DNA sample found under Channon's fingernails, suggesting it could point to an unknown assailant. Moreover, Clay's chronic back pain was presented as evidence of his physical limitations, with 20 witnesses, including his sons, vouching for his innocence and incapability of committing the murder. Despite these efforts, the overwhelming forensic evidence, paired with Clay's well-documented history of coercive and controlling behavior, led to his conviction. The tragedy took an even darker turn in December 2021 when Logan, the family's youngest daughter who struggled with autism, went missing. Her body was discovered 2 months later in a river, and evidence indicated that she had taken her own life. This devastating event added another layer of grief to the already shattered Starbuck family, illustrating the long-reaching consequences of trauma, grief, and unresolved emotional wounds stemming from Channon's murder. A notable outcome from this case was the improvement in emergency response protocols. Channon's unanswered 911 call became a case study that spurred regional training initiatives focused on treating such calls with greater urgency and precision. This reform aimed to equip first responders with the skills necessary to prevent similar oversights, turning a painful lesson into meaningful systemic change. June 2013. A jury found him guilty of first-degree murder with 4 aggravating circumstances, sentencing him to life without the possibility of parole.